Thanks for tuning in. This is the full build video of this gorgeous sword. I've done parts of it in other videos that I'll link to, so I won't go into as much depth in this video, but I will put links in to where I did things like make the fuller or the fluted handle. And as always, let me know you like these by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. The project started off with this bar of 2-inch by 4-foot long 5160 steel. I'm going to completely cover it with some layout fluid so that I can actually start marking where the fuller is going to be in. It's the first thing that we add. If you want to see the full video on how I added the fuller, follow the link. I use a 1-inch wheel to grind in the fuller. By resting the blade on the table and tilting the angle either forward or backwards, I can adjust the height of the fuller. So using the lines that I've scribed in, I can use the 1-inch wheel to start grinding in that fuller. One of the things you have to be careful with is that you don't grind right through the blade on both sides. The idea is to get it thin. So the way I measure it is by using a height gauge and either a drill bit or a piece of rod so that I can use it as an offset so I can roll it into the bottom of the fuller. And then by taking the difference between the two measurements, you actually get the depth of the fuller. Once I've got the bevels in, I'll shape up the tip and then we'll start putting in the bevels before we actually heat treat this. I'm going to take the bevels down to about the thickness of a 1/4 just to leave some meat on so that we avoid any warpage. I'll mark the center line of the blade using a drill bit that's the same thickness. It'll give me a nice center line that I can bevel against. I use an old belt running about 50%. Seems to me that I don't make fast mistakes if I slow the belt down. And after making a bunch of grinder dust, I'm relatively happy with the profile of this blade. I'll use the templates from my website and I'll lay out the handle and cut out the tang. The tang we're going to round off and have a really nice gentle curve into the guard. It'll give us a lot of strength. We won't have any stress risers or anything else. It's now ready for heat treating, so we'll run it through a couple of normalization cycles. I use the heat app to actually determine the temperatures to run this. This is a great app. It covers most of the steels that you want and it's available for Android and Apple. I recommend getting it. So we'll throw it in some Parks 50 and then throw it into the straightening jig. And it comes out to about between 55 and 60. My Rockwell file has only jumped by 5, so it's between 55 and 60 for hardness. Then we're going to throw it back in the kiln, do a tempering cycle at 400 degrees, and we're ready to start finishing the blade. Time to start on the handle. Looks like a handle to me. We'll start with the cross guard and we need a slot for the tang. So I'll mark out some lines that I can use as guides on the mill. We have a 1/4 inch tang, so I'm going to actually make a 1/8 inch slot and then try and mill it out probably to 7/64 and finish it off with a file. We start off by drilling the holes through the steel just to make it a little easier on the milling machine. Using the holes as endpoints, I then use a 1/8 inch carbide end mill and start milling out the slot. It's quite slow going. I've got this video sped up quite a bit and I can only get about halfway through the block and then I have to turn it over. Using the same side as a reference to the table without moving the table, I should have my holes relatively lined up, and it does work out pretty darn close. With the hole all the way through, now I'm going to use the mill to mill it a little bit wider, going to 7/64ths, somewhere in there, somewhere close to getting it in the tang, and finish it with files. I know there's machinists that could do this right to spec. I am not one of those guys. The tang is slightly tapered, and I start with trying to fit it and go to the files, try to fit it, back to the files, try to fit it, until we can actually get it all the way through. I'll use the paper template now to trace out the shape of the guard. And then we're going to head over and hog off a whole bunch of material using the angle grinder and the 2x72. With the basic curve now, we need to make the blade fit, which means going back to the hand files and widening the groove near the top to fit the curve we put in on the tang. And it's just back and forth, file, test to fit. And I always like it when I have to hammer it on and bang it off. Back to the paper, and now we'll start shaping the profile of the guard. Now that the guard's roughed in, we can actually work out the spacing and start making the fluted handle. I did a separate video on this. I'll put the link in the description. But if you're interested in the detail of this one, go check out the full build video. I'll take a couple snapshots of it here. But for the most part, it's a long process with a lot of setup up front. The first step is to use the brass to create some end caps that we can actually then scribe with some lines. That and the two spacers. Everything is going to be set up on the alignment of those. I use a lot of CA glue when I'm building my handles, just to glue things together to keep them aligned. We also use alignment pins so that while I'm setting things up, everything always stays in exactly the same place. For alignment pins, I actually just use steel finishing nails. They're strong, tough, and have a decent diameter. With holes drilled in all of the parts, the alignment pins will ensure that we always put this thing back together in exactly the same way. The next part is all about making a lot of blue dust. We cut the block, we start shaping it, and then I use the typical square, octagon, round to creating the final shape of the handle. I use some CA glue over the holes we just drilled in the block, and then using rasps and files, I start filing out the hole for the tang in the blade. Again, it's just another long process. But in the end, it works out to be a perfect fit. We actually have to tap it on gently, which is about as good as I can make it. Then I add some alignment pins using the brass that we glued on. And now we have everything lined up on the tang with alignment pins that we can start shaping things. After marking out the shape from the template and using a piece of ready rod to hold the end caps on so that I know where to grind to, I then take it over to the grinder and we start making a lot of blue dust. First of all, going to a square shape, then an octagon shape, and then a round shape. Well, actually kind of oval, but it allows me to make sure I keep everything nice and uniform. The fluting was done using the lathe by creating a grid on the handle, drawing some lines, and then doing a lot of filing to file out the flute. There's a whole video on this. If you're really interested in more of the detail, go check out that video that I've linked. We'll add some gold-plated brass wire that we twist together and lay in the grooves that we cut into the fluting. We'll drill some holes to anchor the wires and CA glue them into the channels. And now we have a gorgeous handle ready for this sword. It's time to start turning the pommel. I've created this crown-shaped pommel that's consisting of two parts. A fluted cylinder with crowns and an internal piece that'll actually screw the pommel onto the blade. We start off with a block of 2-inch 4140 and we start creating the cylinder. From the cylinder, I then flute it down to 2 inches on the end and 1 inch to match the brass spacer on the other. We give it a clean up with a file and then we're on to a very boring task. We start off by drilling a hole through the pommel piece. We start off with a centering tap and then just gradually make our hole bigger, and eventually we start using lathe tools to bore out the space for the top of the crown. I go in as far as I can before I actually have to switch to a boring bar, and then I finally do a cleanup pass and we've got the pommel crown finished. We part off the pommel and now we're ready to start turning the screw that will sit inside the pommel and create the crown of the pommel. We'll use 1032 threads, and the first thing I'll do is drill a hole and thread the pommel crown so that it'll screw on to the back of the sword. With the hole threaded, we then have to turn down the shaft that'll fit inside the pommel. And with a great tight fit, we're then going to simply part it off and round off the top. I round it off, sand it off, and now we have a pommel with its crown. I forgot at this point, it's kind of hot, but it does fit really, really nice. My absent-minded cameraman forgot to press record while I was putting the alignment pins into the pommel. But now I'm going to actually mark out where the ridges on the crown go. And I just do that with a Sharpie and then head over to the grinder and start cutting them in. I use the edge of the belt to grind in the loops and then finish everything up with a diamond bit. Then it's on to finishing up all of the shape of the guard. And finally, with everything shaped, we head over to my Cricut, where we're actually going to cut out the coat of arms, the word strength, and my touch mark so that we can etch them into the blade. I'll put a link where I've done the full explanation of etching. This is kind of an abbreviated portion. What we start off with is taking our vinyl, we weed out the part we want etched. Then we actually have to use transfer tape because not all of the parts are connected, and we place that on top of the guard and the sword and the pommel. With the coat of arms finally pressed down, we peel off the transfer tape and we're ready for etching. This is the same machine I've used all the time. I'll put a link to how I actually do all of this. This is just a real quick run through, but you can see we get some nice coat of arms on the guard, we get strength around the pommel, and we get my touch mark. After cleanup, this looks really nice. We have the coat of arms centered on the crossguard. The pommel was a bit trickier. I had to actually individually place each letter because it's a taper on the pommel, and not only that, a curved taper. So no matter how I tried to put a flat decal on, it wouldn't sit straight. So I had to cut each letter out and individually place them. I love it when a plan comes together. Final assembly is always a really cool thing to do. Nice fit up of the guard, followed by the handle sliding into the alignment pins, followed by the pommel, screw on the pommel, take it over, buff it up, and this is what we get. It looks gorgeous after buffing. Right from the etching, the burl handle, the gold wire, the mirror polished sword. If you like these, please hit that like and subscribe button. Stay tuned for the other two blades in this build, a rapier and a dagger.